roles online. The following video I have made to help people get healers set up and established. It's going to go in depth over different skills and different traits, different reasonings for running different things. We cover champion points, enchants, food, potions, Mundus, all sorts of things that you guys need to help get your healers set up. So if you're new to healing and looking at getting your healers set up, I suggest you try and watch this video, take a look through, and hopefully you'll find something useful there. Before we get started, I'm just going to touch on the fact that this video will not cover any class-based abilities. I'm going to cover those individually per class, like per video, so that it is not an overwhelming amount of information because this video is already very long. I'm also not going to cover any sets, which again I am going to look at covering individually, and I don't cover any scribing skills. This is just going to go over the base foundation for what you want to do for setting up any healer at any point. Alright, so we're going to take a look at some of the restoration skills on the healer. Starting straight off with the ultimate, the Panacea. This one isn't really used in PvE content at all. It is occasionally used in PvP. Usually, in my experience, which is very limited for PvP, there's usually some better skills out there, class skills, that are used instead. So we're not really going to touch on this one. Now we have our biggest hot, which is the Grand Healing morph. There's two different variations of this. There is Illustrious Healing, which is the one you want to go with, and I'll explain why in just a moment, and Healing Springs. Now both of these place a big area of effect, a big heal over time on the ground that your allies can get healed from. Each will target 6 people per tick. Now the reason we want to go with Illustrious rather than Healing Springs is because Illustrious smart targets every tick, so every time that a healing tick goes off, it will prioritize the person that needs healing the most. Now the way that that works is people are prioritized based on how much health that they are missing, and then they are prioritized based on who's in the area first. Healing Springs, on the other hand, will only target the priority people for healing on cast. So every time it ticks again after that, it is not going to prioritize necessarily the people that need healing, it's just going to stick with the people that needed healing at the time that it was initially cast. So you always want to go for Illustrious Healing for this. Now, any other differences between these skills, Illustrious is a little bit longer. When at max level, Healing Springs heals for a tiny bit more, but it is a really small amount, so it doesn't really make any difference in that regard. So just go for Illustrious to make sure that you are always healing your allies the way that you want to be. Now, regeneration, we're going to go with the Radiating Regen morph of this. This one will target 3 of your allies with a Sticky Hot, which is one that sticks to them no matter where they move, for 10 seconds. The nice thing with regeneration is it will smart target the people that don't already have regeneration on them. So if you're in a trial group with 12 people, 4 casts will be enough to heal everybody in the group. This is a great filler skill. It's really good to put in between any of your other priority skills when you've just got extra time to cast things. The alternative morph of it is Rapid Regeneration, which targets 1 other ally at the same time. It is a Sticky Hot again. It does heal for quite a lot, but it's only for 5 seconds, so it's really not convenient for most content. Now, Blessing of Protection, the base morph here, this is one of our staple skills as a healer. This is going to give a big burst heal to 6 people in our group, and it is going to provide some buffs that are both going to increase resistances, and depending on the morph you pick here, increase the damage of the damage dealers in the group. So Blessing of Restoration, this one isn't used very much. This one's a little bit more expensive. It lasts longer, it is bigger, which is really, really nice in some situations. It grants Minor Resolve, which is one of the buffs that we were talking about, which increases your allies' resistances. The one that we're going to use for PvE is Combat Prayer. This one gives your allies Minor Resolve again, but also Minor Berserk. It doesn't last as long, it's not quite as big, but this is going to be your go-to spammable for your group. So if you have big heavy heal checks, like in Cloud Rest, or in Teleria in Dreadcell Reef, you're going to be spamming this heal a lot to help keep your allies alive. Now, Steadfast Ward. Both morphs of this skill are really beneficial in their own content. So the first morph is Ward Ally. This one is going to give you 2 shields, healing shields that you cast out For this one is always on yourself, and one is going to be on the lowest health ally in range, lowest percent health ally in range. So this can be really good for things like Basset hard mode in Rockgrove for healing your tanks. There are a couple of other situations where it can be really nice, but that is the prime one that I've used it in. Healing Ward, on the other hand, is going to give you a much stronger shield that also heals for the duration that it possesses, has like a heal strength to it based on the shield. This one you're going to use a little bit more often. This one is common to use in Sunspire when you are healing tombs or cages, depending what you call them. So it doesn't really matter, you want to level both of these. This one I would say is used a little bit more. And then for Siphon, this is probably the least used skill in this tree. We've got Siphon Spirit, which gives you Magisteel, minor Magisteel. That's not really needed anymore. It was common when we used to have Stam classes and Mag classes, because Mag classes would need the Magisteel. That hasn't been a thing in a couple of years now with hybridization, so this one's kind of a little bit of a dead skill. Quick Siphon. This one is still used on occasion. It gives anyone who hits the enemy that is the target for this skill also gains minor expedition for a short period afterwards. This can be nice to help with mobility. I have predominantly used this in Rockgrove, again both on Oaks on the first boss and the second boss Basset. It is not a necessary skill, it is kind of a flex skill if you've got space for it, but it is useful one still to level up. So going through the passives, we've got Essence Drain. You gain Major Mending for 4 seconds after completing fully charged heavy attacks, which increases your healing done by 16%. You can also heal yourself or an ally within 15 meters of the target for 52% of the damage inflicted by the final hit of the fully charged heavy attack. The second part of this is kind of meh, it doesn't really do a whole lot. The first part can be really nice if you know you're going into a heal check. So, for example, going back to Sunspire and healing tombs, if you know that you are going to have to burst heal the people that go in the tomb soon, it's sometimes worth doing the fully charged heavy attack beforehand. However, in most content this is not really necessary, it's just kind of an added benefit. It's not like a make or break thing. So don't get hung up on the fact that, oh, I need to heavy attack for major mending. No, you don't. Restoration Expert, you increase your healing done by 50% on allies under 30% health. Cycle of Life, your fully charged heavy attacks restore 30% more magicka. This one is really nice. Absorb, with a restoration staff equipped, you restore 600 magicka whenever you block an attack. And Restoration Master, increased healing with restoration staff skills by 5%. So now that we've gone over our restoration skills, there are a couple more kind of groundbreaking skills that we really want to make sure that we have in our heal toolkit. So first we are going to go to our guilds, and then we're going to go to Undaunted. In here you're going to want both of your passives in. They increase the amount of resources that you get on return of activating a synergy, and also increase your max resource amount depending on what type of gear you're wearing. So the two skills in here that are particularly important are Blood Altar, the first one on the list. We want to go for the Overflowing Ultimorph. This one is going to give you minor lifesteal to enemies in the area, and the synergy also heals for a lot more. This is one of your core skills as any support that you're always going to want to have unlocked. The second one on this list in particular that we want is Necrotic Orb. Now we're going to morph this. The first one is Mystic Orb. This is a damage variation. You'll know if it's damaged or not because it's blue if it's damaged. If it is the healing one, which is Energy Orb, the skill is yellow. This one is going to be a really powerful heal over time that also provides a synergy that allies can cast, which will give a big burst heal plus a resource restore. This one is really important, and usually you'll have both healers running this. Sometimes when you get into some of the more sweaty endgame content, they might not run it in certain scenarios because they want to increase the damage synergies that are hit rather than the heal ones. For any kind of regular content, going into healing the first time, going into healing for the 500th time, you're going to want to have this skill. And finally, getting into Assault and Support. This is a really beneficial tree. I know a lot of PvE players don't like PvP, but unfortunately, if you want to be a support player in group content, these are skill trees that you really should level up. Okay, so now getting into skill lines that a lot of PvE players aren't really a huge fan of. This is the Alliance War ones, the Assault and Support. Both of these are really beneficial on a healer and a tank. Any supports really are going to want to level these skill trees, even if they're not your favorite. I'm sorry. So, starting first with the Assault line, the first skill we have here that we want is Warhorn. For this we're going to want the Aggressive Horn morph. So this skill increases the max magicka and max stamina of our allies by 10% for 30 seconds. Now, for anyone that isn't aware, most of your damage and healing is based on both your max resources and either or both your weapon and spell damage. So anything that is going to increase your max resources or increase your weapon and spell damage is going to be an asset to your group. So we want Aggressive Horn here, which will increase your max magicka and max stamina for you and your allies for 10 seconds. This also has a really big range, so this one is pretty easy to hit everyone with. Now, the benefit of Aggressive Horn over Sturdy Horn is that this one also gives Major Force, which increases you and your allies' critical damage by 20% for 10 seconds. For your allies, for the DDs, Major Force is really big because each DD needs to be reaching crit cap to be maximizing their damage. They need to hit both penetration cap and crit cap. So adding 20% crit damage for your allies is really going to help them reach that gap that they want to get to. Now, Vigor, this is for healing. Like, these are the two skills in particular you need from this tree. The rest can be beneficial, particularly these two situationally, but the first two are the ones you really want, which is a good note if you don't like PvP. They're pretty easy to hit. Now, we've got two morphs of Vigor here. One is Echoing Vigor, which is a group hot. It will hit 6 people. Like Radiating Regen, it is sticky, so it will stay on the people you hit with it, and they can move around with it, and they will still have the hot on them, which is really nice. This is quite a fat hot. It hits for a good amount. One of the nice things about this is that it is a stam skill. So as a healer where you're magicka based, and the majority of your skills are magicka based, Vigor is a stamina based skill, so it can help you balance out. So if you're running really low on magicka, rather than, like if you're not having a burst heal moment, rather than having to take the 2.5 seconds to do a fully charged restoration heavy, you can just hit Vigor a couple of times. The other morph is Resolving Vigor. This gives you minor resolve. We already have this from Combat Prayer. It doesn't give it to your allies. This is really good in PvP. Can be really good for tanks, because tanks aren't always in a position to get minor resolve from Combat Prayer, but it is not really one that you'll need on a healer. So Echoing Vigor is the one you go for. So a little bit more niche, usually this will be covered by a tank, but sometimes healers run it too, is Rapid Maneuver, and we go for Charging Maneuver here. This is going to give our allies major and minor expedition. Usually this is used on trash packs to help people run faster and move quicker through the kind of dead areas where there are no enemies to target. Any skills from this tree might be used if you are pairing with Powerful Assault, because Powerful Assault requires you to use an assault skill to activate. I'll cover that a little bit more in a sets video later on. So onto the support tree. This one is also super beneficial for healers. It's a bit grindy, but I would recommend leveling this one to 9 to get the most out of this passive here, which increases your magicka recovery by 10% for each support ability slotted. So this one, you hit 10% by getting to level 9. It is 5% at level 6, I believe. It might be earlier than that. For the first one, which is still nice. The 5% is great, but if you really want to maximize on it, go to the level 9 to get the 10%. So first one on this tree is Barrier. This one is a pretty common ult. You will see it pretty commonly slotted on the front bar on healers to help with sustain. It is used in a lot of groups on the Pillager healer. Both morphs of this are used, so we've got Reviving Barrier, which gives you some healing over time while the shield persists. And then we've got Replenishing Barrier, which will give you ultimate and magicka back when this shield dissolves off of the allies with it. Both of these morphs are beneficial. Replenishing is a little bit more common at the moment. We have a lot of sets that are being used by healers at the moment that require ultimate, so the more ultimate you can generate quicker, the more beneficial your set will be. Previously, Reviving has been more common. That heal can be super nice, particularly in areas where there's perhaps a lot of oblivion damage and shields aren't doing a lot, but healing does. It kind of just depends on what your group needs and where you're going, but most of the time currently you'll be using Replenishing. Purge. This is an awesome skill. It also sucks. It costs a lot of magicka. It is pretty easy to get to the first morph, which you'll want Efficient Purge, which cleanses up to 3 negative effects from members in your group, and it makes it cost less. If you stick with this one, you will be healed, or the targets will be healed for 1% of their max health, but it's really expensive, costing 6,500 magicka on cast. That's crazy. This one's 4,500, it's still very expensive, but it is quite a bit cheaper. This is the one you want to go for. Guard. This is still used quite a bit in Rockgrove, usually by DDs on the boss A fight, but can be used still on healers quite a lot in Sunspire. Usually this will help you tank out a bit. So what happens with Guard is you take some of the damage that they are receiving and it gets transferred to yourself, which can help them out a lot. Usually as a healer you're going to want to go for Mystic Guard, which gives you minor vitality, which increases the healing received. This also goes to the person you're guarded to. As a DD you might go for Stalwart Guard, which is going to give you minor force, which gives you again a little bit of crit damage. You get 10% crit damage, which will help your DDs hit that crit cap. So I say usually on healers you're going to be on Mystic. So there are 2 more skills that I want to touch on here. Both of them are in the Fighters Guild tree. So one of them is Circle of Protection here, which we're going to want to go for the Ring of Preservation morph. Now both the base morph and this put a rune at your feet that give minor protection. This one also gives minor endurance, increasing your recovery, but if you morph it you still get the minor protection and the minor endurance, but you heal people inside the area. The other nice thing about any skills from this tree is if you have your Slayer passive in, you increase your weapon and spell damage for each Fighters Guild ability slotted by 3%. Now the other one in this tree that we want to look at is Dawnbreaker. You're not really going to use this as a healer, this is a damage skill. Both of these can be used by DDs, they can be used in Cyrodiil and PvP, but we are just going to use it for passives. So I like to morph it because we all know sometimes we hit the wrong button or hit our ultimate on the wrong bar. But I like to use this one if I don't need the recovery from barrier. I like to use it just to have that increased weapon and spell damage. I also want to go over some other skill trees that might be used healing, or usually are used healing. One of them is your Destruction Staff line. Sometimes healing we also use the bow line instead, or the dual wield. This is not super common to use these 2 trees in comparison. The destruction one is the kind of go-to one. So the most important skill here that you're always going to want as a healer is going to be Elemental Blockade right here. Base morph is Wall of Elements, so this is going to lay down a AoE in front of you that is going to deal damage to enemies in it. The other thing with this, the reason that we want a skill like this, is we want to have the trait infused on our back bar, and then this will continue to proc the enchant on our back bar. So if you are using a bow, you will use Volley, which is going to give you the same thing, and Endless Hail, again to proc your back bar enchant. If you are using dual wield, which is really uncommon, you are going to use Blade Cloak, and you can use either one of these morphs, whichever one you prefer. This one gives you a little bit more mobility, which can be really nice. It allows you to move a bit faster, so usually I would go with this one. Now the big catch with if you're going to use dual wield back bar is to proc your back bar enchants, you need to be pretty close. You have a lot smaller range, so that's why dual wield isn't very common on a healer. As in, bow is going to be a little bit more common, and your go-to is going to be your Destro Staff. Now the other one in here that's particularly important is going to be Crushing Shock. This one is used for a lot of interrupts. A lot of the time tanks are going to have this covered, but sometimes you're going to want to be responsible as the healer, so have that one unlocked. On the interrupt line, if you are using bow back bar, you can use Poison Arrow and Venom Arrow to have an interrupt on your back bar. The other one here is Elemental Susceptibility. This one is going to give Major Breach onto your target. It's also going to apply 3 status effects pretty continuously, so this one actually does quite a lot of damage as well. The other morph is Elemental Drain. This one gives you minor Magic Steal. As you mentioned earlier, Magic Steal just isn't really necessary anymore, so we're going to stick with Elemental Susceptibility instead. Now for any other skills that we're going to want, being the craft ones and alchemy, we are going to want the medicinal use here. when using potions, resulting effects last 30% longer. This is going to allow the buffs from your pots to last the full duration of your pots, which is going to give you more benefit out of them. The gourmand is really nice for just saving you a little bit of money. It makes your foods last 20 minutes longer. So if you are a damage dealer, or if you have friends that are damage dealers, you might know that usually you try and stack your bars so that your passives are most beneficial. So you want your best passives that are going to increase your damage done on your front bar. Healing is pretty much the same way, so you want to put skills that are going to give you extra weapon and spell damage generally on your front bar. Now this isn't always viable, it's not always going to work out that way, and that's okay, but usually, as you'll see here with my bars, you put the things that don't have good passives with them. So Elemental Susceptibility is a long duration skill, it lasts 30 seconds, there's no passive for me having this slotted on my front bar, and it's a destro skill, so it has to go on my back bar. Alter is the same thing, there is absolutely no passives for having Alter, so you might as well put it on your back bar. Again, it's a 30-second skill, so pop it back there. Heal Orb is a super good skill, really powerful hot, really good synergy, really nice burst from the synergy. It's a 10-second skill, so it's not the longest, but it's still a decent amount of time. 0 passives, so no benefit for me putting front bar. Fawn doesn't give me any decent pass, there's no passives from it at all that are going to benefit, so we put it back bar. Now we had Barrier on the front bar before, that's going to increase my Magicka recovery as we discussed here from our Magicka aid. So Barrier is a good one on the front bar, or Dawnbreaker, which is going to give us that passive weapon and spell damage, so that's why we want that front bar if we can sustain without having Barrier on. And speaking of passives, Vigor doesn't have a good passive. Vigor gives us 0 passives from being on our front bar, so usually I would back bar this. Now I do have a habit of front barring it, and the reason for that is if I'm running Pillars of Alonafe. If I'm not running Pillars of Alonafe and I don't have Powerful Assault front bar, I would absolutely swap those two around and put that extra weapon and spell damage on my front bar. So moving on from the skills, we're going to go into the champion points. Now, the green CP tree here today is going to be a little bit different in the future. A lot of the slottables are going to be turned into passive features. You're still going to want to unlock them, so a lot of the information is still going to be relevant. So, for things that you want to have unlocked in this tree, I like Steed's Blessing. This increases your movement speed out of combat by 20%. So that makes, again, running between those trash packs a lot quicker if you have that in. Breakfall. This one is not necessary, it is a passive one, you don't have to slot it, which is really nice, but in Cloud Rest in particular, this one will save your life. Samaja does a bash mechanic, and if she is not interrupted, she will drop players, like she'll teleport them up in the air and drop them down. You will usually survive this, however, if you have any dots sticking on you, so any damage over time stuck onto you, it will probably kill you if you don't have Breakfall in, so definitely put that one in. Steadfast Enchantments. This one is a great one just to save you on some soul gems. 50% chance not to consume the charge when activated, so that one's pretty sweet. Rationer, again, we like this one just to save some money, adds an extra 30 minutes duration to your food. This one is a slottable at the moment. It is one of the ones they announced that would not be a slottable in the future. It would be passive. Liquid Efficiency. Whenever you have a potion, you have a 10% chance not to consume it. This one, if you are using heroism pots, you must have. This is not an optional one in my opinion. Again, this is going to be passive in the future, so later on you're not going to have to worry about this, but for now, make sure this one is slotted. This one's really good. Now, this last spot is kind of up to you. None of these are really going to make a difference to your actual gameplay. On to the Warfare tree. This tree is kind of split up into a couple of little sections. So this side over here is predominantly the heal-based section. This side is predominantly damage-based. This one is predominantly tank-based, a little bit more selfish. This area kind of falls a little bit in between everything. I would say it's a little more damage-based than anything else. So to start with, we're going to put in Eldritch Insight. This is going to increase our max Magicka. As we said earlier, healing and damage is based on your max stats plus your weapon and spell damage. So for healing, we want to make sure we max out our max Magicka. Then we go into this tree here. We are going to want Blessed in, increases your healing done. Now we have a couple of slottables here that we can use. We want, in every group, we want at least one Enlivening Overflow, which increases the recovery, so it gives you some extra recovery when hit. You always want one person in each group, one healer running this. It does not stack, so you do not want two healers running it, but you always want at least one running it. It is kind of a flex spot though, so the other healer would run something else in place of this. One of the really good options here is From the Brink, which gives yourself or an ally under 25% health a damage shield. So this can be really useful in some content. So you want one Enlivening Overflow, and then your other healer usually could run From the Brink. Now going back into this tree, we have Soothing Tide, which increases your healing done by area of effect heals, which would be things like Illustrious Healing. And Swift Renewal increases your healing done with healing over time effects. Again, Illustrious Healing would get benefited from this, the Healing Orb would get benefited from that, lots of class heals will get benefited from that. Now into a little bit more of a flex situation, we have Rejuvenator, which increases your weapon and spell damage per healing ability done. So this will buff your overall healing for your actual healing skills, so this one can be nice. Another flex option is Focus Mending. This one you will use anytime you are doing single target healing, which is not overly common, but again going into Sunspire Tomb Healing, where you have an individual going to a cage, take a lot of damage and need a lot of healing, Focus Mending can be really nice here because it will buff your single target heals. Going back to kind of the main tree again, Quick Recovery increases your healing received, you want that one. Hardy reduces the damage you take from martial attacks, you want that one. Elemental Aegis reduces the damage you take from magical attacks. Preparation reduces your damage taken from non-player attacks. These ones are unnecessary, these are things that you might use if you're a tank, but you're not going to use as a healer. Now, Timeless Discipline. This one isn't necessary because you are a mag-based character. However, increasing your stam pool can be really nice if you're wearing a set such as Martial Knowledge, which requires you to be below 50% on your stamina. More stamina is going to make it easier for you to hit that 50% without depleting yourself to the point where you don't have stamina to play mechanics. So if you have the extra CP, put that in there. You also have your crit chance CP here. If you have the CP for it, definitely put it in because there's no reason not to, right? Like you want to get as much benefit from what you have as possible. Extended Might, again, this one not super necessary. This is if you get into the CP for it. This is beneficial if you have enough. So you increase your offensive penetration. For a damage dealer, penetration is everything. Not meant in an inappropriate way, but if you are not making penetration cap as a DD, your damage is not very good. Increases your chance to apply magical status effects by 30%. Flawless Ritual, you do want this one in. This will help if you are trying to deliberately proc certain status effects on the boss or on your target. Grants you 100 weapon and spell damage from magical attacks. Might as well put this one in, no reason not to. Battle Mastery increases your chance to apply martial status effects. This is basically the martial version of the magical one over here, so you want both of those in. And again, weapon and spell damage. This one, you're not likely to be doing a lot of martial attacks, but you might as well put it in for any that you are doing. Now everything over here is very damage related. One that I sometimes put in here, usually if I am in dungeons and acting as a little bit more of a hybrid healer, instead of Rejuvenator, would put in Untamed Aggression, which increases your weapon and spell damage. Per stage, it works out at 150 total weapon and spell damage, but this applies across the board to everything, to your healing and to your damage, whereas Rejuvenator applies only to your healing abilities. Now there is a damage variation of the same node here called Wrathful Strikes, but unlike either of the others, this one only applies to your damaging abilities. So you can kind of just keep that in mind depending what you're doing. As a regular healer you won't use this one at all. You may use this one, and you'll very likely use this one. Going into the fitness tree, one thing with this tree that is really nice is for DDs and for heals, this is pretty flat across the board. You usually put in the same things. There is again a good amount of flexibility to this tree to kind of add in what you want. One that I almost always have slotted is Rejuvenation, which increases your base recoveries. This one is really nice, that is one of my go-tos. The only situation that I usually don't run this one is on Oak's hard mode in Rockgrove because of the extra recovery you get when you cleanse the spit. If you're not familiar with that mechanic, don't worry about it. If you encounter it later on, it'll make a little bit more sense, but for now this is like a go-to, you always want this one. The other one that I like, but that is not 100% necessary, is Fortified. This one is going to increase your armor per stage, which increases your resistances, can make things a lot easier to survive if you just put in this extra armor. Now, this one is run by a lot of people, ban this Vitality. This is not a CP that I usually run. This increases your max health. The only situation that I tend to run this CP is if I'm running Pass Food, which is food that will only give me resources in Magicka or Stamina, but not in health. Tumbling, this one, again, just going to reduce the cost of your roll dodge, can be really nice, helps make sure that you have enough stamina to play mechanics. Reduce the cost of Break Free, these are all flex ones, these are not things that are necessary, they're not slottable, so they're not going to take place up here, but they're just nice ones to have. Mystic Tenacity, you do want this one in. Hero's Vigor, increase your max health per stage. You need to put this in to unlock a lot of these trees, so you can just go ahead and put them in anyway. This is your little speed tree. This gives you lots of different speed boosts. So your passive is Hasty, increasing your movement speed. This one is very nice, it only costs a couple, it's only 16 points. So you put that one in, and now Celerity. This is one of my go-tos. I run this on everything, DDs, tanks, heals, everything. It increases your movement speed across the board, so helps you keep up in trash packs, helps you move around, just generally a really good slottable that I think is worth putting in. We have lots of little passive ones here for your block cost, the amount of damage your block does, the amount of damage you can block. These are all passives, so if you have the points for them, go ahead and put all of these ones right in. If you don't have the points for them, don't worry about them. And then we've got your movement speed or bracing, again, a passive one. So this last spot you'll see here, we've got one last spot. It's up to you what you put in. If you are a pillager healer or a barrier healer, Shield Master can be really nice to help make sure that you get your barrier on time, particularly if you're trying to barrier a lot in trash packs. The other one here that I really like is Bastion, which increases the effectiveness of your damage shields and damage against shielded enemies. Now, as a healer, damage against shielded enemies isn't so much of a predominant thing that you're going to be doing, but you are going to be casting a good amount of damage shields between Arcanist healing with Chakram, Scribing shields, and also Barrier. Bastion is one of my favorites to go to here, so I'll often put that one in. Now, going just off for this is a passive one. It can be a little bit harder to have enough CP for this one, but if you do have enough CP, I would put this one in. Just gives you 10% more resources when you are revived, which can be really helpful because, particularly I think for tanks, but everyone really, we all know how tough it can be when you're first rezzed and you can't do anything. You can't block the next mechanic because your stamina's at 0 because you just rezzed. So this can help quite a lot. The other one that is a flex option is Spirit Mastery. Now, if you are a new healer or new to trial content or just trying to learn or get into new groups, I wouldn't worry about this at all. Generally, the rule of thumb when you are healing is that healers don't res, or healers shouldn't res, and I agree to that to an extent. Now, you get to a point where you can be really experienced and you can be comfortable having all of the appropriate healing down at the time and all the right buffs up, that you can get a res, but in most content when you are learning, kind of starting out, even if you've been healing for a couple of years, you're not going to want to res. Now, if you're one of those bad people that doesn't listen to your raid lead when they yell at them, or if you're someone that is more experienced, you can put in Spirit Mastery and just increase the time that you have to res people. Don't tell your raid leads I said that, just in case they get upset. Alright, that is everything with the fitness tree. Just gonna slap one in there, so we have 4, just to give you a quick idea on how these like to look. So now that we have gone over our skills and our champion points, we're going to go over our Mundus stones. There are 3 Mundus stones that you'll predominantly use while healing in ESO. So the first one is the Ritual, which increases your healing done. This is the most common one. You'll run this across most content, you'll run this if you're solo healing, you'll run this if you're having to deal with heal checks like things like healing tombs in Sunspire, or perhaps having to heal the ice cages in the first boss in Sanity's Edge, things like that. So Ritual is one of the best ones you can go to. Second one we have here is the Thief. This increases your weapon and spell critical striking rates. Now again, crit healing isn't so much of a big thing, however this Mundus can still be used if healing and trying to put out a little bit of damage. If you were looking to do something where maybe for dungeons you're speccing a little bit more into damage and a little less into healing, I would go for Thief over Ritual. The last one that I'm not a huge fan of but can be super helpful is the Acknowledgements. This is your Magicka recovery Mundus. So if you are really struggling with sustain and you can't seem to get the balancing right, you can try running the Acknowledgements Mundus to increase your mag recovery, and maybe that'll help you out a bit. Usually if you're going to run the Acknowledgements Mundus, you're going to run a few less recovery enchantments on your jewelry. That kind of is just going to depend on what you're doing. So for the case of just about everything, I would slap on the ritual and call it a day. That's going to make your life really easy. Now that we've kind of gone through most of the stuff, I'm going to go a little bit over gear. I don't want to go over specific sets. There are really only a couple of heal setups that are used in PvE content. I want to go over those separately in an individual video where I can explore each set fully rather than just trying to skim over the top. But we are going to go roughly over our traits and our enchants. We want to have light armor. I would recommend going with 7 pieces of light. Now, in the past, we used to do a 5-1-1 because the way the Undaunted passives used to be set up, probably about 4+ years ago now. Back then, 5-1-1 was super beneficial. It was definitely the way to go. Now, I would say go 6-1 or go 7. So I would go 7 light because you want to be maximizing your light armor passives. Sometimes you will need to go with 1 medium or 1 heavy depending on what sets you're pairing it with. For example, Powerful Assault or Saxil, which is a heavy armor set. You may have to run 1 piece of those. The other thing that might help is if you're really struggling, running 1 piece of heavy might help you with survivability. But generally, I almost always go for all light pieces. 7 light is going to be the most comfortable in your sustain. Find what works for you though, there is really no wrong answer. For traits, I go all divines, 7 pieces of divines. You want to be kind of capitalizing the benefit from your Mundus stone. This is the best way to do that. Some people like to run infused on 1, 2, 3 of their big pieces. That is okay if you want to do that. However, there is not really enough benefit there in comparison to running just all divines and maximizing your Mundus stone. So if you feel the need to run an infused piece, that's okay. But if you're really kind of getting into that end game content, I would go all light, all divines. Now for your jewelry here, the traits arcane is fine. The other one that you might want to have is infused. That is also great. The last one that is going to be very niche and you'll use very occasionally is going to be Swift. Places that Swift might be really advantageous is if you're kite healing in Cloud Rest, if you are back kite in Asylum Sanctorum, if you are running through Lucent Citadel where you have to sprint forever and all your DDs are in medium armor and they've all got quick cloak and they're all zoomy, having a piece of Swift there is super beneficial. But generally arcane or infused with a weapon and spell damage enchant, or a mag recovery or a reduced cost. Usually I would go weapon and spell damage first. If you need sustain, add in a recovery piece. If you only need a tiny bit of sustain, you can do reduced cost. Reduced cost is usually more beneficial on a tank than it is on a healer. Usually on a healer you should go mag recovery first, but find what balance kind of works for you. So for our weapons, we are going to either go with a powered or a decisive restoration staff with a berserker enchant, which is a weapon damage enchant, increases your weapon and spell damage. This isn't going to increase our healing done, so front bar you always are going to want a berserker enchant, but either the powered trait, which increases your healing done, or the decisive, which will increase your ultimate gained. If you feel like you need more healing, go powered. If you feel like you don't need more healing but you could do with more ultimate, go with decisive. Now for your back bar, you are always going to want to go with infused. It doesn't matter so much if you have a lightning, an ice, or an inferno here. I find it kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're just pugging, go with a lightning for the off balance. A lot of people are running exploiter. Not a lot of people necessarily understand how exploiter works, so you need off balance procs, so lightning is going to be good for that. If you're in an optimized group, you might have somebody else covering your lightning staff, in which case I would usually go for either an ice or a fire. Rockgrove, I like ice because the projectile shield that you can get can be very beneficial. It can also be beneficial on Ansel Insanity's Edge. But otherwise, flame stuff, particularly if you're looking to do a little bit of extra damage for whatever reason, if you have a weird hybrid build, which I'll just touch on. Usually hybrid healers for damage don't do a lot of damage, but if you are doing that for whatever reason, an Inferno staff can be the way to go. But for our back bar, we want to have the Crusher enchant. Usually, occasionally, we will have the Weakening. Now for enchants on our front bar, on our restoration bar, we're going to want the truly superb glyph of weapon damage, which you make with Rapora, Okori and Kuta. This increases your weapon and spell damage, so it's just going to increase the healing done on your restoration staff. Now for your back bar, the most common glyph that you're going to want is going to be a crushing glyph, which is made with Atade, Tetri and Kuta. This increases your physical and spell resistance of the target hit. So if you're using Wall of Elements, the first target hit will have the Crusher enchant active on them, which is basically, to sum it up, it's going to reduce the penetration that damage dealers need to reach to make penetration cap, which is going to increase their damage done. Usually you run about 3 of these in a group. Usually both of your tanks run them and one, if not both of your healers run them. The other one that is run sometimes is a Weakening enchant, which is made with Atade, Okori and Kuta. This one reduces the target's weapon and spell damage. Now you only want one of these in group. It is usually put on a healer. Again, it'll hit the first target that it hits and cause them to be weakened, which will reduce the damage that you as the group end up receiving from a lot of the mechanics. This can be useful on Zalvaka, can be useful on Teleria. There are quite a few other fights like that it can be useful with, but usually you only want one of these in group because you want to make sure you have good uptimes on Crusher, which is more important to make sure that the damage dealers are reaching penetration cap. Now for our jewelry, we are usually going to want this multi-effect enchant, which is the truly superb glyph of increased magical harm, made with Rapora, Makteri and Kuta. This one gives you a little bit of mag recovery. There is an alternative one that gives you 10 stam recovery, does the same weapon and spell damage that you can also run if you find you need that recovery line. Between your 3 jewelries, that's 30 recovery. Every little bit does contribute, but I personally don't find that there's a lot of difference between the 2 different types of enchant that I use. Now the jewelry one is your Magicka regen, which adds 169 Magicka recovery. This is Rapora, Makoma and Kuta. The last one that you might want is your reduced cost, which reduces your magical cost of spells by 203. As I said before, this one is less common. You'll mostly use this one if you're tanking, but it can be beneficial on a healer to have as well. The other ones that you might want is increased Magicka. This is your armor one. So this is what you're going to want on your body, which is Rapora, Mako and Kuta. So now we're going to move on to our consumables section, starting with the food. So as we've said before, we want to be building into our max magicka as a healer. So for food, we want something that is ideally going to give us increased max magicka and max health. So one of the best ones to go for here is a Bystat food called, this one is Minstrel Bunny Hash. Now there are a couple that do the same thing. They're all going to have the same numbers so you can read through them. But basically they'll have the same stats here, so increase your max health by 5,395 and your max magicka by 4,936 for 1.5 hours. Minstrel Bunny Hash is one of them. There are quite a few others that will read exactly the same, so it doesn't matter what the name is as long as you're increasing your max health and your max magicka. Now, another similar alternative is the Artane Pickled Fish Bowl. This one's a little bit more expensive to make, but it has almost identical stats, so this is one that you can use as well. If you find that you are struggling with stamina for whatever reason, you can also look at using Bewitched Sugar Skulls. This one is going to increase your max health by 4,620, but also your max stamina and your max magicka by 4,250. It also increases your health recovery, so if you're in a situation where you're trying to learn and you feel like maybe tank kite or funk kite in Asylum Sanctorum, where you're just kind of struggling a little bit because you don't have a lot of healing because of your setup or something like that, this food can be really beneficial. It's really nice when you're learning really any content. Sanity's Edge, learning Ansel, there's a lot of outgoing damage there, things like that can be really helpful. The extra stam pool is usually why I run this. The health recovery might be just what you need to help you out. On the lines of recovery, if you are learning and you are struggling with your sustain, Witchmother's Potent Brew is a good alternative as well. It increases your max magicka by 2,856 and your max health by 3,094. Also increases your mag recovery by 350. This one, as you can see, the max stats are pretty low in comparison to the other foods I've suggested, but it does give you that mag recovery, so if you can't find the balance between using the right enchants and using the right Mundus stone, then you can try this food out. I really do not recommend it if you are really trying to get into in-game content. Like, you shouldn't be running this, in my opinion, if you're doing trials or anything like that, but when you're learning, this is a great food to help you out. So now for potions, there are a couple of different potions that we're going to use. The first one that I'm going to suggest is going to be spell power pots. Now you can either get the Alliance Magicka potions, which will do exactly the same thing, but the duration is a little bit shorter. You can buy those with Alliance points in Cyrodiil. You can also buy them off of traders or PvP players. The other one is going to be the craftable one, which is exactly the same thing, it just lasts a little bit longer. So this one you're going to use Lorcan's Tears, Cornflower, Lady's Smock, and either Namira's Rot or Water Hyacinth. They'll both do the same thing, so you can interchange them. This is going to give you Major Sorcery, as you just saw, which increases your spell damage, which is going to increase your healing. Major Prophecy, which is your spell critical, which is still going to increase your healing, and restore some magicka, plus give you major intellect, which will increase your magicka recovery. These are the ones you are going to use pretty much all the time. There's a couple of situations where you won't, and I'll go into those in a second. Between using either your spell pots or your alliance spell drafts, which give the exact same things, these are the predominant two that you're going to want to use. Now, another alternative, if you are needing to have a little bit more stamina recovery, is using the tri-pots here. So again, there's two variations. You can use the Crown Tri-Restoration pots that I've got right here, which give you health, magicka, stamina back, and give you major fortitude, intellect, and endurance, increasing your recoveries for all three types. Or you can make the same things here: Bug Loss, Columbine, and a Mountain Flower. Essence of Health! We did it! Right away. Excellent. Okay, so it gives you your health, your fortitude, increasing your health recovery, gives you magicka, major intellect, increasing your mag recovery, and restores stamina and gives you major endurance, which is your stamina recovery. So you can run these ones. You have to bear in mind that if you are running tripods like this, they are not giving you any kind of increased spell damage or spell critical, so they're not buffing those sides of your healing, so they are not the best option. But if you just need that stamina recovery, you can run them. You do get the free pots from the store, the Crown's pots, so if you're doing dungeons and stuff like that, you can run the cheap free spell pots that you pick up. It doesn't really matter at that point. But if you're doing trials, I would stick to the Alliance spell draft or the Essence of Spell Power. Just make sure they say the right things. There are a lot of people, if you buy them from traders, that like to make pots that are lower level. So rather than using Lorcan's Tears, they use a lower level reagent there, which isn't going to give you as much of a benefit as running the Lorcan's Tears as well. Alternatively, there is one last one that we're going to talk about, and it's the one that costs a lot, and anyone that knows is already cringing. So again, we start with Lorcan's Tears right down here. We keep that the same. Also, I definitely called Lorcan a reagent. It is a solvent. So we're going to do Columbine, Dragon's Blood, and Dragon's Rune. This is going to hurt. These two are very expensive ingredients. These are heroism pots. Now these are the ones that give you magicka and stamina back. You can make one that only gives you magicka back and doesn't give you the stamina, which you'd usually run if you're doing MK. So this restores magicka, gives you the major intellect again, restores stamina, gives you major endurance again, and gives you minor heroism, restoring ultimate over the duration. These are very expensive because the Dragon Rune and the Dragon Blood, these are both very expensive ingredients. They can only be obtained from either a box in Southern Elsewhere that you can access after doing an insane amount of quests, or from dragons that you kill again and elsewhere. Usually these are quite expensive, so don't use these unless you're getting into min-maxing. You're really pushing into endgame. Now for healing, you can pick just about any race that you want. There is like pretty much all content, particularly if you're not min-maxing, if you're not trying to go sweaty and skull push and do stuff like that. You can do anything that you want on any class that you want, any race that you want, which is the beautiful thing about how ESO is designed. Breton is the ultimate go-to heal class in my opinion. They increase your max magicka, they increase your spell resistance, which can be really nice if you're trying to figure things out and learn the ropes, and they also reduce the magicka cost of your abilities. If you are a warden, I would only ever go as a Breton on a warden. I have tried healing as other races on a warden, and the sustain has always been painfully rough. It has been really unpleasant. So because of that, if you're brand new, just figuring things out, or you're choosing a warden, I would go with a Breton. If you want to go for something that can swap a little bit between damage dealing and healing, there are two really strong options here, and they are going to be both Dark Elf, right here, and High Elf. So High Elf is going to increase your max magicka a little bit and give you some extra weapon and spell damage. It is also going to give you a little bit of recovery in your off trait between your mag and stam. So as healing, it would be your stam, it would give you some stam recovery. Now, if you're going to go with Dark Elf, which is definitely more meta right now for damage dealing, you would get an increase in your max magicka and your max stamina. You get increased flame resistance, which is just a nice little passive buff, and you also get an increase to your weapon and spell damage. An old school listed go-to is Argonian. It increases your healing done, which can be really nice. It increases your max health and gives you disease and poison resistances. And it also increases your max magicka and stamina and allows you to get extra recovery when you drink a potion. This is not one I would recommend. This is great if you're starting out and you want to roleplay, but otherwise it's really not going to bring you a whole lot to the table. You're going to get way more from any of the other three listed already. Now for our ultimate, our peers, we have the Khajiit. I personally think the Khajiit is a great option. These increase your recovery on all three of your stats, which can be really nice. They also increase the maximum amount on all three of your stats, and it increases your critical damage and critical healing by 4%. Now, we said before, critical healing isn't a major thing that we need to build into, but the reason I think that this one is really good is because you can flex this between a DD, you can flex it between a heal, you have the extra crit in it, which is really nice as a DD, particularly if you're pugging and your group isn't necessarily making crit cap. And the other thing that I really like with these is that Khajiit are a phenomenal class to use both in PvE and PvP, so if you want to do anything in PvP, Khajiit's a really good option. Now, the last one that gets recommended a decent amount at the moment is a Nord. Nord is kind of interesting. This is not a regular healer class. It's one that kind of got a little bit of attention within the last year, I would say, is because of the ultimate gain it gets when it takes damage. Having said that, as a healer, taking damage is not something that you should be consistently doing. Now, there are fights where you will consistently take damage as a healer, not because of anybody's fault, just because of how the mechanics are, and that's fine, and Nord could maybe excel a little bit more there. All of these are viable healing classes. They're viable damage classes, and they're viable tank classes. You will have to make adjustments though. So when it comes to actually healing in content, you want to try to aim to have all of your skills up as much as possible. All of your ground hearts should be down all the time. You want to fill with sticky hearts in between. Going into a heal check, you want to make sure you have all of your hearts up ready. Pop an orb through group and then you combat prayer until the heal check is done. You continue to combat prayer spam until the end of the heal check. You shouldn't refresh any of your dots in particular or your hearts. Now if you go in at the beginning with no hearts up, I would definitely make sure you try and pop 1 or 2 before the heal check fully gets underway, but I wouldn't stop mid heal check to refresh hearts that were close to expiring or had just expired. Dots on the other hand, you should let fall off on this period. Ideally you get them refreshed ahead of time so they don't fall off at all, but if you can't, that's fine. Healing is more important at this point because of the heal checks. With that concludes everything that I planned to cover in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it informative. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. I will be making more videos in the future that will cover more content, including things that cover class specifically and sets specifically and explain the reasoning behind why we pick certain things. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining. Goodbye!